Well, the Prestonpans salt was really the finest salt.
Yeah.
It was really the finest salt that you could ever see. It was, yes, on the table and for baking.
And for cooking and that sort of thing, yeah.
The flakes were as big as that, and as light as a feather.
You can't see it for steam, but the salt pans would be here. This was the salt pans here. And what he's doing is he's shoveling the salt and putting it into the wee train that pulled along down into where they dried it, which went at the back of the salt pans. It went along and then it went down into where the salt oil was really kept and fermented downstairs. And then through the next part was where it was all, there were racks, and the salt would be put into bags and put onto the racks, and the furnaces, the heat of all the furnaces used to dry the salt. Then it would be pulled up the stair on the pulley and put into the barrel, cleaned. Not that it needed much cleaning, but you'd get wee bits that had to be picked out and then packed.
Mary Jane, could you name these people here?
Let me see.
I can see my mum and my granny, and I think, is that Veronica?
That's
and
Belle.
And Belle.
Belle.
Right, I would have... Right,
And I think, and Annie Renton, Veronica.
Veronica?
Veronica.
Right. Well, who's the two at the bottom?
That's Fiona and I.
Oh, it's you and Fiona?
That's me and Fiona, your mum,
right.
or granny, and we
All
Ned.
right, so I wasn't born then, if that's Veronica.
No.
Right. Proper works was really just that one.
Yeah.
That was a proper salt works. But, you know, when the tide's low enough like it is now, I can show you holes and rocks where I've got a photo of my dad sitting by one of the last wooden poles that was still there when my dad was young. Only the holes left now, but they had wooden posts that they would hang their sheet, you know, their oilskin sheet or whatever. And just average people in Prestonpans would just have their own little bit where they would put the water in and wait for it to evaporate and get their salt. So there was many of them on the beach, but only the one proper salt works that actually used coal to heat it.
If you think of the people that's worked here in the past hundreds of years, you know, if you just like to think back, think of my father and my grandfather, that's as far as I can go back. Well, I can remember a lot of the men that worked here, you know, I could name quite a number that's worked in this place. But if you were going further back, the thing, I mean...
this really is history, isn't it? It really is history.
It's really how you've got to think about it, you know? But the people that used to be here long ago, and I used to think about my grandfather.
My earliest memories are of the saltworks. My granny also had a bakery and we spent time there at the cottage, but there was a shop attached. But mainly the saltworks. We all grew up there. We loved to play there. My cousins and we were all just like brothers and sisters because we were together all the time. Well, if you got a heavy snowfall, it was guaranteed you were lifted out your bed, wrapped in a blanket and over the road. And again, my granddad would be over before that and all the fires were all lit, and so it was, you were going into Warmth. But they just used to make beds up on the top of these salt bags and we just all cuddled down. And then they would work on to the wee hours so that they could get the salt out, had to be out for the next morning. So that was us, and away to school in the morning, quite the thing. It's just how it was. When you weren't in the saltworks, my granny's sisters used to visit on a Saturday, and I used to love that. I used to love it. I used to get sitting on the floor beside them. And then when something that you weren't to hear all got put out the room, I used to hate that. The aunties would be going, away through the room. And you got dismissed, because obviously it was something you weren't to hear. But I used to love when my aunties, they were actually my great aunties, came down, and I loved the Blethers. It was great. The saltworks was on the High Street in Prestonpans, behind what was the old Hammer House at one time. I'm not sure, but it was the monks, the priests that used to work the saltworks. So it was Prestonpans Pans, as in the pans, salt pans.
The monks used to work here at one time, going back a bit.
Oh,
They used to be chained in here at one time. They used to actually chain the salters so that they couldn't go to any other job because they couldn't replace them. And they were actually chained to the building, they couldn't get away.
So the wall was built from there right along with a gate in the middle, and then right to the end of this wee lane and down.
And at one time they brought the salt in buckets, the water from the beach in buckets. But it was during my granddad's time that they actually got an electric pump to pump the water up in a
big
pipe.
Belt.
So.
Do you remember the belt, Sinclair?
I remember the belt.
You remember that?
Yes. And there was a bit fell on my head when I was little.
No, because you shouldn't have been there.
Yes. I was driving the salt lorry up and down there when I was about 10, 11.
Aye, or even 5 on your dad's knee.
I was working the pedals and cousin Sink would be driving, you know. So.
My grandfather went round with horse and cart.
Yeah.
Bathhead, Edinburgh, trailed the streets, you know, selling salt.
Yeah.
And as a boy, I'd only be about 4 or 5 years at the most. And I remember the first lorry that arrived here with an old Albi.
Yeah.
No windows in the doors, solid rubber wheels.
This was actually the stables. The horses, the horse and cart would come out of here.
And this used to be a big wooden gate.
Yes,
you couldn't actually
it wasn't
out.
like that. You couldn't see out.
No,
it was
a big wooden gate. I used to pirouette along that gate on my tiptoes doing my ballet. Think about it. It was a sheer drop and it was rocks and it was... But you know, kids did that. We played on the beach. You were, you know, when you think of how we used to jump from rock to rock. Oh, slippy, slimy rocks and see how far you... And we didn't always make it, by the way.
When you went up the stairs into the factory where Gran and that worked, you could virtually taste the salt.
Oh yeah, it was very,
when
very
you opened
salty.
the door, you just, you know, and then anything that was metal was just rusty.
And the men worked long hours. They worked from 5 o'clock in the morning till 5 at night. And that wasn't then finished at that. They had to come back again around about 7, 8 o'clock, clean out all the furnaces, stuff up the fires again, which took them to about 9, half 9, so that the furnaces would run all night.
My granddad never went to the war because he was producing salt, and that these people were exempt because they were feeding the nation. And at that time, everybody shared. The fishermen would give fish, and miners would have extra coal. That was dished out with neighbours. And the salt beef was given. Everything, just everything. My granny had evacuee children as well, and neighbours ripped down jumpers and knitted up clothes for them because she had 5 altogether. It was one family, and there were a family that was left, so she brought them all home. And my granddad used to put them on the salt lorry and take them up to the chapel on a Sunday because they were all Catholic. So he wanted them to go to their church. So they used to pile on the back of the salt lorry and off they would go to Prestonpans, to the chapel, when he and my granny would go to Chalmers, and the priest would keep them there and he would collect them on the way back, sort of thing. The happiest times of their life, they said, when they had all these kids in the house.
It was a godsend in the recent strike because we had some real rough weather and some of the old thing washed away and some more coal came on the beach and there were folk down here every day picking it up. But it's almost a thing of the past because the pits have stopped and they don't dump the rubbish anymore and what is left beneath the sea is getting less and less year by year naturally. It's gradually wearing away.
I remember my granddad, people would come to the door for advice a lot. And he would take them into a room and they would have a chat. And my granny had a bag with messages and whatever was in her cupboards. And she used to both of them gave. Often my granddad would hand somebody a 10 shilling piece, you know, a note, just to keep them going to feed their kids for the rest of the week. Because it was tough then, you know. But we were always a bit luckier because they had the saltworks.
You know my sister that was down the back? That's me and her in front of the salt lorry when we were little. That's me and my big sister Veronica. That's us again. That's coal there. They used to just shovel the coal down that chute into the furnaces. That could be the joppa, or a mixture of joppa workers and Prestonpans, or even Cockenzie workers. But that's exactly how I remember the saltworks. That was the same barrow that we used to pack. We used to do that.
They would push their thumbs forward, fold one side, fold the other, down, and then sellotape it, and it went to the next person. It would pile up, and usually my granny would bag it. It would be put in long ways into this big bag, and then she had a wee machine thing that would put a wire round the top, and she would pull it, and that secured all the bags, and then she would lift it across to the other side of the room. I don't know how she did that. She retired 3 times, and she still was doing all the lifting. And I often remember maybe one of the other women trying to lift the bags, and she'd say, "Come on, out the way, out the way." And she just would lift them to where they went, you know. Just strong stuff.
That's a bag of the cooking salt. And that's the house. That's this house here, as it was a dairy. And that's my dad. So my dad was only 44 when he died. He died before his mum, so I was only 13. So that's why that didn't happen. The chimney's got smoke, you can see it. So whenever that was taken, and you can see it, definitely smoke there, and that's the other, where they put ash out at this end as well. You can see there's ash on the beach where the tide's just moved it a little. But that's the stables. That's the entrance in at the back for the stables. But you can see the steam actually from the salt pans there. You know, the smoke for the chimney, but you can actually see the steam coming off the salt pans, which are up there. I mean, this place went like a fair. You know, when my grand lived here, we were always... I mean, you get weeds coming through the tar there now, but it never happened for me because we were running about cycling and whatnot. So,
and the house was always full because, honestly, I loved a Saturday when Jean and Katie came and my mum and what have you was there, and it was always fresh cream cakes out of Ford's. Now that I've put my glasses on, I think that could be our grandad, the man, standing, but it's because there's a shadow over him. And if it's not, it could be our great-granddad, because they were quite alike.
Yeah, you're right, Mary Jane. I'm going to get my glasses.
I think it was our granddad. He just put me in mind of Jesus. We had a high-back chair, and there would be one on one knee, one on the other, another one here, all around him. It was like we were cascading. And he used to make up songs, and they never made sense, but I loved them. I used to say, "Oh," it's like, and they were stupid. But he did this to make us giggle. He was kindness itself, and he was a lovely man. It took a ton of coal to produce a ton of salt, and when the coal got more expensive, it just wasn't worthwhile, you know. So it became unviable, and they bought it in, but it was never ever the same. We had the crystallised salt, where what we bought, it was like pearls of salt. It was man-made. It just wasn't nice. The nearest thing yet, I have to say, is what they produce in Cockenzie House. That is the closest thing to our salt that was produced. And the only difference there, I believe, is I was talking to the man at Cockenzie House, and they use egg whites to purify. My granddad used ox blood to purify the salt. It's the closest to what we had. The colour, the crystals were much the same. As far as I know, we were the last working saltworks at that time. And then they used to bring up salt from Wales, but it was never ever the same, just not the same quality. My Uncle Alec died in 74. But we weren't producing salt by that stage. So it was probably a year and a half after that, my granny kind of gave up because he was just a young man when he died. And it finished her. She decided it was enough. And she was 71 when she died, but she retired, I would say, probably at 69, and then went back, and then went back again. So, well, nobody was running it right, were they? It's called control. She had a big party and retired, and I think she was retired 4 days, and she was back.
And of course, we used to have Sunday salt here as well. Butter salt, Scottish salt, butter salt. I couldn't name all the different names of salt. But it's known far and wide about the Prestonpans salt. It really was a fantastic and it dazzled you to look at it.
Yes.
I mean, you don't see salt as white as that nowadays.